place where mounds of prehistoric peoples, ancient native peoples, exist. Well, you can't do that. That's spiritually wrong. Third thing. The third thing. Now, the Pt2 plant has had a lot of problems. We need to do a health assessment to make sure that people in the area, that their health has not been degraded as a result of that facility. Because your community of 2,500 has already paid a price for this. And so, to me, this is not even a close question. It's about protecting the health, the lives, the water supply of the people in the community, and it's about protecting the state of Ohio from having a nuclear dump located in the state. And furthermore, we have to change our energy policies in Ohio. We have to find a way for the utility companies, going to have to figure out what to do with that nuclear waste. They're not going to store it in Ohio. They have to keep it on site until we come up with a solution, and they have to do the best to isolate it there. Final comment, nuclear power was sold to us as being power too cheap to meter. Our utility rates keep going up because these companies have not kept faith with the people in this state to find a way to keep rates down. Why? Because they have not been able to produce the power that was promised, and also because nuclear power, in and of itself, they never told the people they were going to have to pay the cost of storage. And this waste degrades over a period of thousands of years. So we're stuck with it forever. So the ratepayers and the taxpayers are stuck with it forever. As far as I'm concerned, I want to minimize Ohio's exposure to that kind of injustice. Thank you.
I agree with Dennis on this issue, and I agree with you, sir. One thing I heard you say was you feel misled because DOE has put out plans and different assessments, and you think that you have determined and others have determined that there's actually an aquifer that is at risk there when they were pretending or representing that it was not. That's, to me, an example of we need to hear from local communities about what's going on in their area in order to address and understand and solve these types of problems. We should not have a nuclear dump in Ohio. When I was in the legislature, I fought to reclaim the scrap tire nuisances that were all over the state, and many of you may remember. They burned, and they would burn for months at a time, and people would dump more scrap tires on them. We got that cleaned up. We were able to use new technology, to use water technology, high pressure hydro technology to clean those up, and we do not have a scrap tire problem in the state of Ohio now. That was something we did when I was in the legislature. When I was Attorney General, I went after polluters and people who were cheating and violating the law to get an advantage in the marketplace, which is the same thing I saw at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, by the way. And it's wrong, and we went after it and we stopped it. As to the Pt2 facility in particular, we need to make sure that the community's voices are heard. As you said, this community has already done tremendous service. For years, they supported Cold War efforts in the United States, in the local community, to protect us. Now they need to be protected in turn, and we owe them that duty, I believe, as public officials in the state of Ohio. Thank you.
I feel like an Appalachian wallowing Anyway, this is Beth Neal. I introduced her earlier.
Beth Neal with Chillicothe City Council. The Ohio Legislature, Ohio Senate, Governor Kasich has repeatedly bragged about their Ohio Miracle budget. And in Chillicothe, just 3 or 4 years ago, we experienced a several $million budget cut because Ohio cut the funds to municipalities. Now Ross County is experiencing that same issue. They have a several $million cut to their budget. And in response to that, we have to have levies, we have to cut programs. So my question to both of you is, how will you change that, and how will you change that budgetary relationship with municipalities?
Where'd you go next? We'll just switch back and forth.
That's fine. And thank you for that question. I've been speaking all over the state and hearing from people all over the state about the war on local governments. That's what I call it, that the state legislature has been waging now for years. and years. And when they talk about the so-called Ohio miracle, what they're talking about is the improvement in the economy nationally under President Barack Obama, who put policies in place to recover from the recession. But Ohio has actually lagged job growth in the nation over this time, so there is no miracle here. And the way in which they have fixed the budget is to take money again and again from local government in the state, telling you to tighten your belts while they don't tighten theirs, and instead they're giving money to their cronies. They're giving it out in tax cuts to the people who need it the least. They're giving it out to charter school CEOs who have been abusing our public schools all over the state, our children, our teachers, and our schools and our communities. And they are doing various things. Every time they have a local government issue, local government gets the short end of the stick, whether it's the MCOs or whether it's now going to be municipal centralized income tax collection, where you're not going to be able to monitor how they're handling it and whether they're giving their money back, and they want to take an administrative fee off the top that's a fat fee. This is a problem in Ohio. If we don't support our local governments to even do their basic jobs, how can we then ask them to take on extra problems like the opioid crisis? How can they possibly cope with that? We need a partnership between state and local governments, and it starts with funding, and it also starts with respect. There has to be respect for the people in our communities who are on the front lines. When we deal with government day to day, who do we deal with? We deal with local government and people who deliver the services, people who are face to face with people in our communities, people who understand our communities the best. That's who we should be listening to, not doing all the telling from Columbus, which is the way it's been for the last 8 years. Thank you.
I served in the Cleveland City Council for 4 terms and mayor of the city of Cleveland. I understand that local government is closest to the people. It's accountable. People can pick up a phone and surely get a hold of you, and see you at the supermarket and tell you what's happening. And that level of accountability has to be accompanied by local communities not being starved of the resources to be able to deliver for the needs of people. It's just fundamental. The state has siphoned money away from local government. I think the amount right now is about $1.4 billion a year. So city services get cut. But it's worse than that, because what it reflects is a shift of power away from communities and to the state government. And that money is then taken and accelerated to the top. It's the same game that's played in Washington. They take the money from the mass of the American people and they accelerate it to the top. Now, my experience in local government has put me in a position where I really do understand and not just sympathize with local communities, but I understand what communities are trying to do and can have the kind of dialogue that will enable me to not just change the policy, because let's be clear, we must change the policy. We must reinstitute the revenue sharing between the state government and local communities that had existed prior to this administration. And what is just unforgivable about this is that the present administration has created a rainy day fund with this money. They can look like fiscal wizards, not just balancing the budget, but they've got a surplus. How in the world can they have a surplus and Chillicothe has a deficit because they're taking your money? So it takes an executive order first to switch the paradigm and to say, in our language, it's called power to we the people, to bring the money back. And also to create stipulations as to how the money can be used, because communities have housing needs that aren't being met. They have some smaller infrastructure needs that aren't being met. I want to make one other comment here. Previously, I talked about stopping a nuclear dump. I did that, by the way, with the help of Republicans in the state Senate, where I served. I don't polarize. I don't call down damnation on people because they're a different political party. or a different political philosophy. The inclusiveness of this ticket is a spiritual principle as well, because we're all citizens of a common planet. And while I might have some fundamental differences with my Republican brothers and sisters, we have to deal with each other as human beings and people and find a way to make common ground. And I've done that. And I will do that as a governor. And to understand that there's different ways of doing things, but there are some things that are not even a close question. And one is local government funds. That money's going back to the communities the minute that I take that oath of office. Thanks.
So now I have some rapid fire yes and no questions. Keeping in mind that we ask you yes, or to say yes or no and move on. And then hopefully you'll submit some really in-depth answers as to why yes or no. So I'm just going to go down and how do you two want me to, do you each want to answer? Help me out. Tell me how you feel comfortable.
You want to start with?
Okay. All right, I didn't ask that in the meantime, so yeah. Okay, so we'll start with Rich, and then I'm going to ask the question, and then it's just a yes or no. Dennis, yes or no. Tara, yes or no. And then we keep moving on. So do you plan or will you pledge to develop a way to increase access to the polls for all Ohioans and put an emphasis on inner city and rural areas that lack equal access to public transportation?
Yes, I will. I'd like
Yes.
to elaborate more on that, but when
Yes.
we get a chance. So.
Yes.
Okay, next, Tara. Are you willing to pledge to develop a plan to ensure that Ohioans are automatically registered when they reach 18 years of age?
Yes, absolutely.
Dennis?
16 years of age, yes.
Yes, and not have to renew, especially as a voter, but just renew their driver's license should be sufficient.
You're already developing the plan, that's wonderful. Rich, do you believe primary elections should be open to all voters and not limited to party affiliation? Would you be willing to fight for this within the Democratic Party?
I've seen that work in California.
Yes or
Maybe
no?
it could be
Yes
here,
or no?
but,
Yes or
I think
no?
That would be up to the voters.
So, Dennis,
Yes.
Tara,
Yes.
Rich, would you be willing to work to have a voting holiday in Ohio, to have a minimum of 3 hours for every single employed person in this state to be able to go and vote and know that they would not lose those 3 precious hours of pay?
Yes, and I saw the disgusting
Dennis,
voting
yes or
lines
no?
in 2004.
Yes or no?
Should not
Yes.
happen.
Tara?
Yes.
Okay, and going back to Rich, would you be willing to fight to make it legal for Ohioans to be able to vote by mail?
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes.
Yes.
Rich, do you support and will you vigorously, with everything in you, fight for a minimum wage of no less than $15 an hour that is attached to inflation, and give people a right to join a union, meaning to collectively bargain, and in particularly to have family-oriented work schedules so people can actually be with their children and have a life? Yes or no?
So that's 3 questions. I fought for family medical.
Yes or
leave.
no?
I was
What?
first on the
Okay,
legislature,
I
so
want to
agree
know,
with
will
that.
you fight for minimum wage?
And
Minimum
right to
wage.
collectively bargain and for an increase in the minimum wage, yes.
Do you support 15?
I think that
That's
we
the
can get
number.
there. I think we can get there eventually, yes.
Do you support it?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Tara?
Yes.
Okay. Rich, will you vigorously support a prevailing wage jobs plan in Ohio, meaning Davis-Bacon Act? We, as Ohioans, need to educate our children and ourselves and our neighbors about the Davis-Bacon Act. It protects the workers, whether they're union or non-union, when they're working construction. If I'm a non-union worker working on a federally funded job, that means I get prevailing wage. What creates prevailing wage and props it up. Union wage. So we really need to know, will you support that? Will you fight for us? I think, did you answer last? Okay, Tara.
Yes.
Yes.
I always have, I always will, I enforced it as Attorney General, yes.
So you're next, because I'm trying to go. Will you pledge to fight with everything in you against any right to work laws that may come out of this current legislation? I think that John Kasich wants to go down in flaming history, showing the state of Ohio that he can slam us one last time. Will you fight against the right to work laws if they're passed?
I'm against it as a law, I'm against it as a ballot.
Okay. And Dennis?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So here's a few more, and then I'm going to go back to the audience. Yes or no? Will you pledge to support health care for all Ohioans, including dental and eye care, Rich? Or Tara?
Yes.
Yes.
Healthcare should be a right, we should all have healthcare, absolutely.
I'm asking you yes or no. Will you pledge to support health care for all Ohioans, including dental and eye care?
I will work for healthcare for all Ohioans, yes.
Okay, Tara, will you pledge not to take donations from private prison industry, big pharma, payday lenders, and the fossil fuel industry directly or through bundling processes?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think I'm getting any contributions from payday lenders, that's for sure.
But that's not what I asked. And first of all, I asked for a yes or a no, and I'm going to repeat it because this is critical.
Yes.
Will you pledge not to take donations from private prison industry, big pharma, payday lenders, or the fossil fuel industry directly or through a bundling process?
I said yes before.
Okay. Alrighty, now we're going to women's issues, yes and no. Tara, do you support the Equal Rights Amendment? And will you use your power as Lieutenant Governor to lobby the states to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment and to remove the arbitrary deadline imposed by Congress for over 30 years?
Yes.
To be lifted.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, as Nevada did last year.
And good for you. Will you vigorously support CEDAW cities in Ohio? Rich.
Will I vigorously support what?
CEDAW, C-E-D-A-W, cities in Ohio. And we've got somebody coming up that can explain it. If you don't know what it is, that's okay.
It's the Convention of Women's, wait a minute, the Convention on Elimination of All Women Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the 1979 treaty.
Thank you. So will you vigorously support that? And it's okay if you don't know everything about this. I mean, hey, there's many people in the United States think the Equal Rights Amendment was already ratified, but you will support.
Yes.
Okay. And starting with Rich, will you pledge to protect a woman's right to choose in Ohio, no matter what?
I have done that for 30 years, yes.
Because some of the Democrats have decided that it's okay to elect people who don't support choice. Dennis?
Yes.
Tara?
Yes.
Tara, will you pledge to protect Planned Parenthood funding and access to reproductive health for all women
Yes.
and girls?
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes.
Yes.
And Rich, will you or do you have or will you pledge to develop a plan that will be detailed and funded to address sex trafficking and the escalating incident rate of domestic violence in Ohio?
Yes, I started the first Human Rights Trafficking Commission in the state's history.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, next up for a question from the audience.
Thank you. Well, my name's Jeffrey C.
We want your question. We don't need to know
Yeah.
about you. We need the question.
Well,
You don't like
Just-
it? There's-
I own a historic home next to the Piketon facility. I have a 1-mile fence line with the facility. I'm here to back up my friend Dennis Foreman, but I am going to ask a different question of you. And I want to blow your minds a little bit by...
We really need your question.
Yeah.
We need it.
By just pointing out that we are at the end of a road here, at the end of which is an earthwork called the Hopeton Earthwork. There is a doppelganger earthwork next to the Piketon plant, exactly the same. So this goes to what Dennis Kucinich mentioned earlier. And my question is, I'm very happy that both of you have said that you're going to support our position, but we have a problem with other politicians, and that includes some Democratic politicians. It's not just the Republicans who are a problem. It was the Department of Energy under Obama that made the decision to build this 100-acre nuclear dump in Piketon. Also, our Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown has not yet taken a public position on the waste dump for or against, but we can assume that because he's working for funding for the dump in question, that so far he seems to be for it until he says otherwise. So my question is for you, will you not only, it's great that you're with us, but will you also work to work with the other Democrats, including those who are running for office this year, to persuade them to come over to our side, to build a unified Democratic position this year in 2018 so that all the Democrats are taking a solid, strong position against the Piketon nuclear waste dump. Will you do that?
So it's basically a yes or no answer. I don't mean to be rude, but guys, there's other people that need questions.
Well, the answer is yes.
I will speak to other officials, but I will say I do not speak for Sherrod Brown. He speaks for himself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Phyllis.
Gerrymandering is a serious problem, and I was wondering if, as governor, you would be able to do anything about that?
I know a little bit about gerrymandering. My district was cut up into 4 pieces. And the popular assumption is that it was the Republicans who did it, but the truth is that it was the Democrats who did it. Gerrymandering has to be, and we shouldn't even be talking about using the word gerrymandering. You talk about how districts are drawn. They need to be compact. They need to connect communities. They can't split communities. The drawing of congressional districts has to take into account some underlying principles of geographical and economic cohesion, so that someone who's in the House of Representatives can actually represent constituents. So, yeah, as governor, I would have a vote on the redistricting plan, and I would not use that vote in a partisan way. I would use it so that it would be fair to all. Now, the thing that I don't understand is when the Democrats made the deal in 2012, if they'd have hung in there and negotiated, they could have ended up with 6 districts. But instead, they chose to have 4 districts that were overwhelmingly Democrat, and ended up giving the Republicans 12 districts. Now, to me, that's not very good negotiating. So I think as governor, I could end up with a plan that would get the Democrats more seats, but have the lines drawn in a fair way. That would be my approach. Why? Because I remember, what happened to the people in Cleveland. I represented that area for 16 years. That wasn't my district, it belonged to them. And by having that district carved up, it really deprived people of representation that they were used to. So, yeah, I take that very seriously, And as governor, I intend to be very active on that issue with the interest of the community in mind, not the interest of political parties.
Well, Dennis, I find this is something we have in common. I had my district cut into 4 pieces when I was in the state legislature in 1991, so I know a little something about redistricting as well. And it was purely for partisan advantage, and I've objected to it then, I've objected to it ever since. The representatives and legislators should not be able to pick their voters. The voters should have the opportunity to pick their legislators. It's called democracy, and it's what we stand for. And I'll give you another example of what I saw about redistricting and gerrymandering. Any of you ever see me testify in front of the House Financial Services Committee? See those guys baiting me and money in their pockets for raising issues and pressing their point of view on behalf of predatory lenders and abusive debt collectors? That's because they were gerrymandered, and all they ever did was look over their right shoulder to see possibly somebody coming from the right wing in a primary. They didn't have to care about the general election. They didn't have to care about the mainstream of voters in this country. And that's what we get when we have gerrymandered districts. I believe that we should have a fair districting process. I think it's crucial that the governor be part of that process. I objected to this plan until they restored the governor's role in it, which they appear to have done, but I'm looking at the fine print on it. And as governor, I will be able to insist that we do get a fair districting for Ohio, and that we have competitive districts so that the voter's voice matters again. We had every district in the state, every congressional election last time was decided by 18 points or more, and most all of them by 30 points or more. That is not democracy. That is a caricatured map drawn in a cartoonish way by people for political advantage on both sides of the aisle.